Hello, my friends. It's my great delight today to welcome to our conversation Jude Currivan, Dr. Jude Currivan, who's also the author of The Cosmic Hologram. And this is her new book that I've been reading. Very fascinated. The Story of Gaia, the Big Breath, and the Evolutionary Journey of our conscious planet. So I have a lot of questions, but let's start, first of all, with why you wrote this book, Jude, and thank you for joining me. What is the basic reason for writing this book, and why do you think we should all be reading it? I'm reading it right now and enjoying it thoroughly.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Well, it really goes back about 20 years. 20 years ago, I received an inner message, basically, that at some point, I didn't know when, I would write a trilogy of books. And this was 20 years ago when I hadn't written any books and had no intention of writing any books. And after that, and before the Cosmic Hologram and before the Story of Gaia, I wrote 5 books. But that 20-year-old message really inspired me that at some point I would write a trilogy of books that would help to understand, experience, and embody unity awareness. And so years passed, and I never felt that the time was right. And also, and crucially, there wasn't sufficient scientific evidence to really ground what I was being guided to bring forward. And then about 6 years ago, I wrote the first of the 3, which is the Cosmic Hologram. And that's very sciencey, it's very cosmological, but it's also bringing the evidence that our entire universe exists and evolves as a non-local, unified entity, as a living and conscious entity, literally a great thought in the mind of the cosmos. So that was the sort of the first book of the trilogy. And I was able to bring a lot of evidence for that was very, very recent at the time and is still being unfolding. But then last year, or 2 years ago, I had a sense that it was the time to write the second book. And the second book is the Story of Gaia. So it tells the story going right back to the beginning of our universe, of our planetary home, literally as a conscious being in a living and conscious universe where mind and consciousness aren't something we have. They're literally what we in the whole world are. So with the second book, this is more about the experiential of what that can mean when we relate to ourselves and our planetary home in this way.
Just not to jump the gun, but what's the third book going to be?
The third book is hopefully to be entitled Many Voices, One Heart. And it's the story of us. It's the story, as I would seek to share it, of us now, where we've come from, where we are now at this amazing, momentous, pivotal, potential point of our conscious evolution, perhaps for us to wake up and remember that we're inseparable from the whole world and what that means. I'm working with many, many transformational change makers that are saying, if we can, instead of coming from this illusion of separation, this dis-ease of separation that we've been in without blame or rancor, but if we can come instead with this evidence now that we have, that reality is unified, we can actually come together and base and underpin who we are, how we are, as a unity of narrative. And what then that means, because it changes everything. And so I'm working with a lot of global change makers to what that might mean in terms of eco-governance, in terms of hollow education, in terms of who we are, how we are, in terms of whole being, because it changes everything when we come from a perspective of unity and diversity instead of a perspective of materialism and separation. So the third book is about us and what that might mean for us if we can wake up to remember we're inseparable.
I'm speaking to Dr. Jude Currivan. The book is called The Story of Gaia, The Big Breath, and the evolutionary journey of our conscious planet. The book is very scholarly and actually very readable at the same time, but it's also very expansive. It covers many different disciplines, going from biology to physics to mathematics to information theory, and also a very personal take on Jude's own journey. So instead of actually going through the entire book, which is impossible, I'm going to read a few sentences from the introduction and then from the appendix. How's that? And then have you explain that. And so we go with the introduction and then right to the appendix. And then I have some questions after that as well. So from the introduction, which is called Big Breath, information is reality. Please explain.
Well, we've had a 20th century science based on energy and matter and space and time. And that 20th century science came out of earlier worldviews, earlier paradigms that were quite mechanistic. But the 20th century breakthroughs of the quantum pioneers and of Einstein and relativity were revealing a very different perspective of the nature of reality. It was showing us that we cannot separate an observer from an observed. It's showing us that time and space are relative to an observer, yet they have to come together as space-time to enable our universe to exist and evolve as a unified entity. They're showing us that consciousness is fundamental. And yet, 100 years ago, when those incredible discoveries were made, and I know you're aware of this, that many of the quantum pioneers looked to ancient wisdom to help them understand what they were finding. And primarily they looked to ancient Indian traditions, the Vedic traditions of the Gita and the Upanishads, because what those teachings showed us thousands of years ago was the fundamental nature of consciousness as the nature of reality itself. So the quantum pioneers were going to these amazing, wise, profound insights, but they were ignored. What they were discovering philosophically was ignored. It was pushed to the side. So all those amazing clues to this deeper understanding of the nature of reality were pushed to the side, and instead the focus was on technology. And it's thus been ever since. So our worldview actually predates quantum physics and relativity. It goes back to 19th century mechanistic science. Now we're in a situation where the evidence, the anomalous evidence for that mechanistic worldview is so overpowering, is so compelling, that we're not just taking more seriously the quantum and relativistic discoveries, we're realizing that they themselves are not fundamental, that the energy, matter, and space-time of our universe is its appearance. It's not its most fundamental nature. And its appearance emerges from deeper non-physical realms of causation as meaningful information. Our universe has a universal alphabet of just 2 letters, ones and zeros. But from those 2 letters, just as we do in our digital technologies, we make meaning. But the universe makes meaning from these 2 universal letters, meaning of atoms and molecules and planets and plants and people. The entirety of our universe is literally made of universal, meaningful information, and ultimately relational information, because everything's in relationship. In this new perspective, which is all evidence-based now, of a meaningfully existing and purposefully evolving unified universe.
So you're saying that zeros and ones is the mechanism in some cosmic digital workshop that is constantly printing out a 3D or 4D holo movement that we call the universe.
Yes. And we know that from, all scales of existence now and across many, many different fields of research. And one of the really clear guidelines to this was the study of black holes and what happens to a massive star at the end of its life, where, you know, it's used its nuclear fuel, it collapses in on itself, but the collapse is so powerful, the gravitational collapse is so strong that it falls within what we call an event horizon, where the power of gravity, the strength of gravity is so great that not even light can escape, hence the black hole. So we were wondering, well, what happens to all the information of that star? Because if it's lost, then we may as well throw quantum physics out the room. It doesn't work anymore. But what was realized was actually all that information is held on that event horizon of the black hole, but crucially, not in proportion to the three-dimensional volume of the black hole, but the two-dimensional surface area of its event horizon. And that then gave us clues not just to the fundamental nature of information as reality, but it gave us another clue in terms of how our universe is literally a cosmic hologram that projects all of its information from the very first moment all the way till now, and everything in it from a boundary, a thought boundary that we call the boundary of space-time, but it essentially is a great thought and a boundaried thought that is our universe.
Second point you make here, and I get that, you know, the projection from the event horizon, which is basically a flat kind of surface projecting this holo movement that you call the cosmic hologram. And then you have this second sentence here, it is bit, which I recall from John Wheeler. It is part, or rather, we are the bit in the it. You know, that this, what we see around us, is a bit of the it. And the bit is the 0-1 expression. The it is the source of both zeros and ones.
Yes.
And
yes.
It's formless and infinite and timeless and spaceless.
Yes.
Okay. Point number 3, mind is matter. Just explain that.
Well, I say that mind is matter, matter is mind. I mean, one of the things that I think we're going to really upend with this new perspective is to dissolve what appears to be the very solidity that we call matter. Because we know as physicists, when we delve down and down and down, when we get to the quantum realm, you know, I was taught, I guess you might have been taught at school too, you know, we saw atoms as little billiard balls running around. They're not. The further down we go, we realize that all that we call physical reality is so ephemeral, 99.99999999999% so. And what is left is relationships of information, dynamic, existing, evolving. But nonetheless, what we call matter is that incredible ephemeral and yet apparently solid representation. Yeah, and equivalent with energy, of course. So when we say mind is matter, matter is mind. Ultimately, all is mind. Mind and consciousness aren't something we have. What this is showing us, and the ancient Vedic rishis told us, is that mind and consciousness aren't something we have. They're literally what we and the whole world are.
I'm speaking to Jude Currivan, Dr. Jude Currivan. Her new book is called The Story of Gaia, The Big Breath and the Evolutionary Journey of Our Conscious Planet. And I've been reading a little bit, some bullet points from the introduction, which is called The Big Breath. And then now I turn to the appendix, skipping everything else in this very detailed exposition of reality. And this appendix, the headline reads, A New Insight in SCIGHT of Informational Science. And over here, I'd just like to actually read a few sentences again, and we'll just go back to reinforce some of the things that I read from the introduction, and just read them first of all. Information is physically real. Scientific evidence at all scales of existence and across numerous fields of research is discovering that our universe is fundamentally interconnected, interdependent, and ultimately unified. And then Dr. Currivan also goes on to explain the key attributes of the universe. And over here, she says, key framework of our universe, supported by theoretical framework of the universal holographic principle and evidence at all scales of existence and numerous fields of research with digitized information pixelated at the Planck scale area of the 2D holographic boundary membrane of space-time. The reality of our universe is manifested holographically. Our universe is a contained system. Energy and matter are equivalent. The total energy matter of the universe is conserved. Information is physically real and can be expressed as energy and matter, or energy matter. Information expressed as the energy matter of our universe is universally conserved. And again, our universe is a contained system. Relative time and relative space are combined as invariant space-time. Space-time began in a state of lowest entropy. Our universe is manifested holographically with digitized information pixelated at the Planck scale and encoded on its 2D boundary brain. So, my friends, you'll have to read the book to get the gist of this that I just read. And it's an amazingly cogent, coherent book. And I encourage you to get this book, read it, digest it, and it would change the way you think about yourself and about reality. So let's put that aside for a moment, Jude, and let me share with you where I am at this moment in my life and some of the conundrums that I have. As you know, I come from the Indian tradition. I have had masters and teachers who have been experts in Vedanta, Bhagavad Gita, Yoga Vasishtha, etc. And of course, even in those traditions, there are many schools of thought. There's the physicalist school of thought, there's the dualistic school of thought, Sankhya, there's the Advaita, which is consciousness-only monism. And right now, as I look at the three major schools of thought, East and West, by the way, East more in the direction of consciousness-only monism, but then there's dualism, Descartes, which seems out because if mind and matter are two different things, I can't even move my hand or speak. You know, it starts with a thought, ends up with something very physical. So dualism is out based on the laws of conservation of energy, information, matter, etc. Put that aside. So that leaves two schools of thought, matter only or consciousness only monism. And the trouble with matter only is that I don't think anyone has ever proved the existence of a substance called matter. You know, when we look for matter, when I look for matter, say in this iPhone or on this stand or on my hand or on these paintings, I don't find matter. I find a human perceptual activity in human consciousness. And before I can call this an object, or this an object, or this an object, it's an experience. And as an experience, it's actually a human experience. It's not the experience of, say, a crocodile or an underwater animal or horseshoe crab or an insect with 100 eyes. So the more I think about matter, the more I realize that there's no such thing, actually. It's a human name given to a perceptual activity, and that to a very narrow band of what the Germans call the Umwelt of perception, visually speaking, 300 nanometers to 800 nanometers of the electromagnetic spectrum. But that's true of all our five senses. We have bits of sensory experience, and we think that these bits of sensory experience are actually bringing information of the world to our brain. And that's wherein all the problems right now lie, the hard problem of consciousness, because all that's going to our brain through the five senses are action potentials. And all that's happening in the brain is electrochemistry. And I don't experience action potentials or electrochemistry. I experience this, and I experience this body, and I experience some thoughts. And I experience interpretation, and then I call it the external world. Now, if you study Ayurveda and Vedanta, then it's not that way at all. The senses do not bring in any information. They project information. And that information is a small fragment of an infinite, formless field of possibilities that in a Vedantic tradition called Brahman, and this is the appearance of Brahman, which we call the universe, which contains the ephemeral experience that we call the human body mind as well. In other words, the whole thing is a human construct. And a few years ago, I was at a conference with some very brilliant Nobel Prize-winning physicists and mathematicians. And, we were talking about what, say, Eugene Wigner called the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics at explaining the physical universe. And everybody was giving their own opinion. And then, there was one mathematician I remember, I forget his name, he was from Russia, but he was very revered amongst these MIT Nobel laureate crowd, mostly men, of course. But he said there's no such thing as a universe. It's a human construct for sensations, sense perceptions, images, feelings, and thoughts. And, I was very struck by that sentence, that there's no such thing as a universe. It's a human construct for sensory experience. But even he was saying the sensory experience is something that comes out from there in here to the brain. And so that was not my understanding. The only reason I think mathematics is effective in describing the so-called physical universe, that they're both constructs in human consciousness. The physical universe is a construct and math is a construct. And they're describing a mirage which appears as the physical universe to us. Now, I'll stop my commentary in a moment, but now as I read the literature with the James Webb Telescope, and also literature with, I've been interviewing people like Sean Carroll from Caltech, and Nobel laureate Wilczek recently from MIT. And, I find their discussions extremely confusing. So Sean Carroll believes that there are infinite universes, and therefore infinite versions of you and me based on string theory or multiverse or whatever his math is. On the other hand, Wilczek believes that the fundamentals of reality are only three things, and he calls them spin, charge, and inertia or mass. And then he says these are dimensionless entities. Now, in Vedanta, I would understand that, by the way, as what are called the gunas, the three gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas, is spin, charge, and mass. And these are dimensionless entities that ultimately express themselves as the whole universe. Then there is this whole school of thought right now, which is saying there are 2 trillion galaxies, at least. and there are 700 sextillion stars at least, and that could be uncountable trillions of habitable planets, possibly 60 billion in just the Milky Way galaxy. So, and based on what they call the Goldilocks zone, if a planet is too close to its sun, too hot, no life as we know it, too far away, too cold, no life as we know it, within this certain range, probably 60 billion just in the Milky Way galaxy. So my question is, if all this is even remotely true or theoretically true, what's going on? I mean, planet Earth, which you call Gaia, would not be, according to these theories, would not be a grain of sand in all the beaches of the world. So the other day I went to a beach and I tried to actually pick up a grain of sand from the beach, and I couldn't. I mean, the moment I grasped something as a grain of sand, it kind of drifted away, and I couldn't even hold on to it. And I'm sure the beach didn't notice that, one grain of sand was missing. Now, on this one grain of sand, in all the beaches of the world, is one particular species that we call Homo sapiens. And it's saying that we have it figured out, that the universe is a conscious being. And somehow you and I are very privileged with a particular kind of biology or nervous system through which we observe this whole thing, and then we make these conjectures, infinite universes, string theory, cosmic hologram, holo movement, because we have math and we have language and we are able to tell stories. So first of all, I'm asking you, is any of what we say valid? Any, because it's all human constructs. And then my last question is, how did language evolve? Because if we didn't have language, you and I wouldn't have this conversation. And then, of course, we have mathematical language, which is even more precise. And then you have quantum physics, which are all modes of language, actually, in a way. Is that something that, if we believe in this unified, formless, infinite, whatever, then is language itself an expression of the universe, or something we created? But I don't think we can say we created anything, because we are part of the evolutionary process that created language. One last thing, as I read all this, and I also, have become more familiar with the concept of what is called naive realism, and realize, I came across this conversation between Tagore, the Indian poet, and Einstein in 1930, where, Einstein very blithely says there are two views of the universe. One is the scientific view, and the other is the human view. And Tagore responds by saying the scientific view is that of the scientific human being. In other words, everything that we're talking about the universe is actually just the human universe as humans know it, through human brains, notwithstanding that the human brain is itself an experience in consciousness. What is it that knows the brain? And then, this whole idea of naive realism, which has three very fundamental flaws, I think, and I think all these great scientists, including Einstein, were in, and this is not meant to be condescending, they were naive realists in the literal sense, because naive realism means that the picture of the universe is the human look of it, number one. Can't be. The picture of the universe cannot be just the human look of it, number one. Number two, there's something called subject-object split, which is totally artificial. And number three, there's something called matter, and no one has actually experienced anything called matter, only their own perceptual activity. I'll stop there. These are big conundrums for me in my current understanding of what we call reality. So please expound.
Well, I think they're big conundrums for all of us. And I think anyone who says we've got the answers is naive in themselves. What I would say is that the scientific method began 400 years ago, and it came out of a medievalist perspective of the nature of reality that was essentially propounded by the church and the church authorities. And the person who in 1623 wrote a book called De Augmentis Scientiarum was Francis Bacon. And there's also a perspective that Francis Bacon might have been the real Shakespeare.
Yes.
And there's a quote in Hamlet that says there's more things in heaven and earth Horatio than are known in your reality or your perspective. And so for me, what Francis Bacon was seeking to do in the scientific method was not to get rid of the divinity, not get rid of the sense of the Godhead or Brahman or any. What he was seeking to do was to actually suggest a methodology for investigating deeper levels of understanding that were not based on superstition. And all my reading of his work, it's 400 years this coming year to when he wrote this, was about the revelation of the divine through the scientific method. In other words, how can we have a working process that allows for consensus, that allows for replicability, that allows for, recreation of experimental results. And nothing had happened till that point. In 1623, he came up with this perspective, and he's been maligned in many ways by saying it's all about materialism. I don't believe he was, but I believe that he felt that science could, if people followed the evidence, because that was always his always his guidance, follow the evidence wherever it leads. I think his perspective was that the nature of the divine would be revealed at even deeper, greater, grander perspectives. So I'd just like to place that in context. The second thing I'd say is that what I've written about, and also in the Story of Gaia and the Cosmic Hologram, are scientific discoveries, as I've said, at all scales of existence and across many fields of research that aren't human-centered. All that we are finding through this approach, whether it's through the James Webb or it's through the WMAP satellites or whatever it may be, is a universe that would exist and evolve as a non-locally unified entity, whether we were here to interpret it, to perceive it, to experience it or not. And the reason I'm saying that isn't just the evidence, but to go beyond the maths, to go to the basic physics, because maths is a language. Maths can describe pretty much anything, whether we would perceive it, experience it or not. But physics, it's like the sort of the bedrock of whether we as human beings can come together and have a consensual perspective of the nature of reality that doesn't have us at its center, but has a grand, wonderful universe that I call the universe soul, as its embodiment, as its unfolding, as its existence, meaningful existence and purposeful evolution. And there's something that when we came to discover at all scales, we discovered something called the Planck scale, named after Max Planck, P-L-A-N-C-K. And what we find is that the Planck scale measurements, and there are only 5 of them, they're measures of energy and matter and space and time and temperature, but they themselves are based on constants, universal constants that are nothing to do with human perspective or even human measures. And those constants weave our universe together. They're the speed of light, they're the gravitational constant, they're what's called Planck's constant, which is a quantum of action, which relates the quantum nature of the world. And they're what's called Boltzmann's constant, which actually relates to the entropy or the entropy, as I describe it, the informational content of our universe that always increases through time. So those 4 universal constants, when they are looked at and come together in these 5 measures, those measures themselves aren't in meters or seconds or kilograms or degrees. They actually shell out to unity. And any observers, any civilization that would have a scientific basis for their exploration of reality and able to have technologies to delve far out, far in, far down, far up, are likely to have discovered these. And these are not in any way human measures. They are universal measures that are the weavers, that are the woven tapestry of the nature of our universe. So what I'm writing about isn't just about human experience, although that, of course, is fundamental to us. But the cosmology that I'm describing and the evidence is now bringing forward, and it has to be evidentially based in my perspective, because any hope of consensus for this does not rely on human consciousness. And yet we are microcosmic co-creators of its realities. Yet we are purposefully here. We meaningfully are. To me, it seems, and that we have a place at the bow wave of its potential. But that's the universe that I'm suggesting the best evidence we have is describing. And it's not an infinite universe. It's a finite thought in the infinite, eternal mind of the cosmos. And when people talk about, many, many other universes, we have no evidence, not a single iota of evidence for that. There may be. The reason that that idea took hold 30 years ago was that the researchers were finding that our universe is incredibly fine-tuned from its very first moment, and not born in the applied chaos of a Big Bang, but as the incredibly fine-tuned and ordered first moment of an ongoing big breath. But if you are not of a view that suggests that that might be consciously created, consciously, causationally, intentionally brought into existence, then that fine-tuning offers you another interpretation. It offers you an interpretation that our universe is random, is meaningless, is purposeless, and is only one of an infinite number of universes. Because how could it be so fine-tuned if that wasn't the case? I have a different perspective, as I know you do. And my perspective is that the evidence is showing us that our universe exists and evolves as a great thought. As Sir James Jeans once said, a great thought in the mind of God, of Allah, of great mystery, of Brahman. That's the evidence that I'm sharing in this.
No, I think that your book is the most eloquent modeling of what we think reality is. But I have a question here as well. A while back, I was at a debate in Mexico professionally with Richard Dawkins, because he felt it was beneath his dignity to even talk to me and to have a debate with me. He condescended to have the debate in Mexico, but it was public. And I was quoting Freeman Dyson on something, from his book, Infinite in All Directions. And the sentence I quoted was, every quantum experiment forces the atom to make a choice, which is a nice sentence. And Richard, actually, with whom I've made peace, ultimately, we've had lots of engagements which are very contentious, and as you know, he's very eloquent in his language as well, condescending though it is. He screamed at me in this debate, which is now, it's out there in YouTube, etc. And he said, Freeman Dyson could not have said that, he should sue you, etc., etc. So I wrote to Freeman Dyson and copied him, Richard too. I said, Dr. Dawkins suggested you should sue me, but what's your opinion on this sentence that I quoted? And he wrote very humbly back, and he said, there are three riddles that have occupied my attention all my life. And the first riddle is a universe fine-tuned for mind and consciousness. The second riddle is our own consciousness. And the third riddle is the unpredictable. He didn't say random. He said unpredictable movement of particles. Unpredictable could even imply creativity. Randomness implies inherent randomness.
Sure.
So it was beautiful, and I preserved the email. But, the more I think of all these models, in the end, when you listen to the great seers that we like to quote, especially those of the Upanishads, and also the teachers of Vedanta and the teachers of non-duality and yoga, there's something called yamas and niyamas, as you know. And so the first yama is ahimsa, which is usually translated as non-violence, which I don't like because, non-violence is double negative. It's just peace presence. It's the nature of our peace.
Isn't it? Yeah.
It's peace. Yeah. It's presence.
Yeah.
The last niyama is called Ishwar Pranidhana. And where the great yogis, including Patanjali and all these amazing people, they say, and these are bookends for me, the first bookend is peace presence, and the last is what they call Ishwar Pranidhana, which is surrender to mystery.
Yes.
Because they say there's no way you can solve this mystery. You can create models of this mystery, but if that which is fundamental is without form, without borders, irreducible, without cause, beyond space-time, spaceless, timeless, then whatever it is, it's non-conceptualizable, it's non-imaginable, even though it's the source of all imagination. But that reality is beyond all concepts, beyond all imagination, and beyond all perception. And even as you name these constants, Planck constant, Boltzmann, they have human names,
It doesn't matter though, Deepak. It doesn't matter what names we give them. They're universal in that sense. We could call them Jabba the Hutt or
Jude, who came up with them? And when we address science, we say objective, independent of human measurement, and yet the measurement is the biggest problem. Who or what is it that is doing the measuring? And therefore, I feel, and I don't know if you feel this, that science is not the way to fundamental truth. It cannot be, because science itself is based on subject-object split. Science itself never asks who is doing the measuring or what is doing the measuring, and yet it is based on measurement. I just want your help in this.
Well, first of all, I'm wholly with you in the sense that the infinite, eternal cosmos, the numinosity of the cosmos, the ground of all being, is, in my sense, too unknowable by us in our human experience. I've walked between worlds since I was 4 years old, so I've been out there and all, and I've actually been in that no timeless, no spaceness of bliss. I also don't feel it's an either or. I feel it's an and. So for me, what I'm describing is a question of why and a possible how. In other words, we are experiencing as human beings on our beautiful planet within our universe. Now, we can either say it is just me and there is nothing beyond me or beyond us, or we can find ways of perhaps exploring what the beyond us might mean within a grander, larger essence of consciousness, which is what I've been doing and writing about, and we call our universe. So what I'm writing about and sharing is the evidence that the infinity and eternity of great mystery, a Brahman, whatever name we offer, because all the names are human names, so whatever, thinks thoughts, that the great cosmic mind, as Einstein called the cosmos, thinks thoughts. And those thoughts, I would suggest, are what we call universes, and certainly our universe. I can't speak beyond our universe, but our universe. And so for our universe, I guess the question that I asked right at the beginning of the Story of Gaia is why? Why would an infinite eternal cosmos create a universe such as ours? And at the end of the book, after going through this whole story of Gaia for 13.8 billion years, I seek to answer that question of a differentiation, not a separation, it cannot be, but a differentiation of unity and an exploration of what that differentiation might mean on an incredible arc of evolution, from simplicity to greater complexity and diversity, to individuated self-awareness, to a perspective of interconnected interbeingness. And our conversations today are part of all of this. So that's my sense of why and how. And I agree with you. The scientific method cannot ultimately reach that fundamental ground of being. Francis Bacon never supposed it could. What he hoped it would do is reveal the divine. And I believe what we have now discovered with our technologies and with a perspective of the evidence that mind and consciousness are what the whole world are. So it's the monism, not the materialism. And, you know, Dawkins' materialistic view, quantum physics could not work unless the emergence of our universe emerged from deeper levels of non-physical causation. And this year, the Nobel Prize in Physics have been given to 3 researchers, Alan Aspect, Anton Zeilinger, John Clauser, who have been following the evidence for a non-locally unified universe, which emerges from these deeper non-physical realms of causation for many decades. The Nobel Prize is only given, it's not for the faint-hearted, as you know. It's only given when there is sufficient evidence to really ground a perspective, which is why Einstein was not given the Nobel Prize for relativity. He was given it for the photoelectric effect, because that was considered to be without doubt, yeah? Whereas relativity was still seen as being theoretical.
I've been on emails peripherally on emails with these people, Aspect, Zellinger, etc. And, my question has been, isn't just every biological organism, including the human body, an example of quantum entanglement? How can a human body think thoughts, play a piano, kill germs, remove toxins, make a baby all at the same time while monitoring the movement of stars and planets as its own biological rhythm? So everything is non-local, everything, including everything of this book. I mean, this is being processed in non-local consciousness. Of course. So that was very encouraging. But do you agree that every object is actually being processed as an experience in non-local consciousness, and our biology itself is
of course, and in fact, the experiment for that was proven in, there's a wonderful experiment, I don't know if you're aware of, because there's something called Bell's theorem. Yeah. And Bell's theorem, of course, says that the universe as its entirety is non-locally unified. And that's what Clauser, Zellinger, and aspect who just had the Nobel Prize for. But in 2018, following an earlier experiment the previous year, a team at MIT were able to non-locally entangle photons of light in a laboratory with starlight from 600 light years away. And the entanglement was triggered and came up with a plethora that was beyond Bell's limitation. Therefore, the proof of non-locality, with light from a quasar, which is a very active galactic nucleus, 12.2 billion light years away. So we have the cosmological experimental evidence, as well as all the work that Klauser, Zellinger, and Aspect have done in laboratories that stretch for tens of miles. But we have the cosmological scale evidence, exactly what you're saying, that our entire universe is non-locally unified.
And also in time.
Of course, it has to be. It's space-time. It's space-time.
Yeah. I've been speaking to Jude Currivan, and the book is called The Story of Gaia, The Big Breath and the Evolutionary Journey of Our Conscious Planet. And I do feel that this is a very important book because it is laying the foundational principles for a new science, and a science that is much needed, because you face it, the current scientific method, while it has given us this technology that I can speak to you, you're somewhere near Stonehenge and I'm in New York City. While it's given us that, it's also given us climate change and nuclear weapons.
Absolutely.
And inhumane ways of destroying each other, poison in our food chain, destruction of the ecosystem, and everything that we call life, except, we think that we're advancing life when in fact we're destroying life with the scientific method, which can be both divine and diabolical. And it's time to revisit the scientific models that we have, understanding, I would still say that no scientific methodology will ultimately unravel the mystery of existence. Even the explanation or evidence.
I don't think it will, Deepak. I never put that forward. What I would say is that because this evidence that I write about now is showing the unified nature of reality, but it's also revealing that our universe is meaningfully exists and purposely evolves and is convergent with universal wisdom teachings. It's able to come together. So rather than the sort of being the issue that says, no, everything's just materialist, separate, this is not. This is a revelatory science in a way, an emergent science of love. A science of consciousness that has to itself evolve its methodologies to appreciate and bring in this grander perspective of unified reality. So it cannot have that very, very narrow track that it's been on for so long. But, if Francis Bacon was with us today, I think he would be applauding, because what this is revealing is the divine.
My very special guest today has been Dr. Jude Currivan. The book is called The Story of Gaia, The Big Breath and the Evolutionary Journey of Our Conscious Planet. Please read and be enlightened. This is the science we need right now for preventing us from sleepwalking to extinction, which is where actually we seem to be going at the moment with all the technologies we've created. So thank you very much for this wonderful conversation. And I hope many people will benefit from this book. I did anyway. Thank you, Jude.
Thank you, Deepak. Thank you so much. And, just to say that this is an invitation to remember, isn't it? It's an invitation to remember we're inseparable. And surely that offers us hope, authentic hope for our future.
Remember that which was dismembered.
Exactly.
Is now.